Direct containment of SCP-8306 has been deemed infeasible. The entity is capable of manifesting and demanifesting at will, rendering standard physical containment protocols ineffective. As such, Site-898 has adopted adaptive management procedures rather than traditional secure storage. Personnel stationed at Site-898 are to adhere to established cultural superstitions surrounding SCP-8306, including the closing of blinds at night, refraining from whistling past dusk, and leaving symbolic gifts on their cabin windowsills during their first night of residence. Such practices have been observed to reduce hostile encounters with the anomaly and may encourage cooperative behavior. Foundation-issued recording equipment may be used to document encounters with SCP-8306, but all personnel must avoid direct provocation or mimicry of its behavioral tics, notably its whistling. Under no circumstances should an attempt be made to capture, restrain, or forcibly expel the entity from Site-898 grounds. SCP-8306 has demonstrated no overtly malicious behavior toward Foundation staff. However, its unpredictable tendencies and past violent interactions with hostile individuals warrant continued classification as Euclid. Description: SCP-8306 is an entity resembling a male human of approximately 60 years of age, typically dressed in 1960s miner's attire and carrying mining equipment. Its skin is pallid and dusted with mud and coal residue. Its eyes and mouth are gaping voids, absent of anatomical structure, yet capable of producing sound, including coherent speech. Though SCP-8306 presents itself as cordial and sapient, its physiology is marked by symptoms akin to pneumoconiosis, black lung. Distinctive wheezing, coughing, and rattling are frequently reported during manifestations, and these sounds are often the first indicators of its presence. Staff have additionally reported SCP-8306 whistling or singing folk songs. The anomaly appears to favor variants of In the Pines. Notably, SCP-8306 self-identifies only as the Foreman. Despite its benign presentation, SCP-8306 is tied to multiple anomalous phenomena and incidents within the Red Brook Mine region, suggesting its presence may serve as a catalyst for, or a manifestation of, local anomalies associated with SCP-8987. The entity is the only known runs-red anomaly to display sapience and speech. While interactions with Foundation personnel are often conversational, its behavior remains cryptic. Testimonies suggest SCP-8306 is not inherently violent toward Site-898 staff, but demonstrates hostility toward individuals linked to Marshall, Carter, and Dark operations, particularly Theodore Keschner, POI 8987. Under observation, SCP-8306 has demonstrated abilities that include manifestation and demanifestation at will, including phasing through barriers, induction of hallucinations and auditory phenomena in nearby personnel, generation of coal-infused mud from its injuries or orifices, capable of suffocating and incapacitating victims, influence over local wildlife and anomalous acoustic events. Personnel are advised to treat SCP-8306 with caution, acknowledging its apparent preference for respect and ritual. Attempts to analyze its motivations or nature remain ongoing. The first official reports of the entity, later designated SCP-8306, emerged from the Red Brook Mine during the early 1960s, though whispers of its presence among local workers appear to have predated those files by several years. The site, a privately owned coal extraction operation under the corporate guise of Summit Anthracite, concealed ties to Marshall, Carter, and Dark and its resource harvesting front. It was within this environment of secrecy, exploitation, and deteriorating working conditions that the anomaly first manifested. The earliest miners to speak of it referred to a specter foreman, a pale man with a lamp whose hollow face exhaled the same rattling cough that plagued dying laborers. At first dismissed as superstition or exhaustion, induced hallucination, the accounts escalated after multiple fatal accidents were reported in tunnels where the entity had allegedly been seen or heard. Recovered documents from the period, including accident reports, employee ledgers, and fragments of testimony, highlight a disturbing consistency. SCP-8306's appearance almost always preceded catastrophic tunnel collapses, failed detonations, or incidents involving respiratory failure among workers. In one testimony preserved in Red Canary files, a miner recounted hearing the wet rasp of labored breathing echoing through the shafts minutes before a blasting sequence misfired, killing 5. The report's supervisor annotated the account with a single dismissive remark, "Hick ghost tales." Yet repetition of such accounts across dozens of independent reports began to establish a pattern the company could not ignore. A handwritten letter later recovered from the belongings of foreman Theodore Keschner makes this explicit, his admission that something not of men was haunting the mine, mocking his authority, and sowing disorder among the crews. The letter, though unsent, confirms he recognized the anomaly, but interpreted it as sabotage rather than supernatural interference. By 1963, as SCP-8987's activation events disrupted operations across the valley, Foundation informants embedded in Appalachian industry flagged Red Brook Mine as a locus of anomalous activity. Field agents dispatched to observe noted the strange rituals miners had adopted, knocking supports at the tunnel entrance, leaving small offerings of salt or lamp oil, refusing to whistle after sundown. Such practices were attempts to appease the foreman, whom many miners regarded less as a threat than as a twisted guardian spirit. Ironically, the figure's reputation divided the workforce. Some believed SCP-8306 prevented even greater collapses, others accused it of causing them. This schism culminated in open unrest, with men refusing to descend unless the foreman had been heard patrolling the lower shafts first. The Foundation's awareness deepened following the arrest of Keschner in 1966 during Investigation Red Canary. Interrogation revealed his role as an MCIND operative, but shed little light on his direct encounters with SCP-8306. His reports to his employers, however, describe an adversarial relationship. He claimed SCP-8306 disrupted equipment, sabotaged detonations, and exerted influence over his men, convincing them to sanctify accidents as if they were ordained. The most telling moment came when Keschner admitted to facing SCP-8306 in the depths. He described its eyeless sockets burning into him, with a presence that induced auditory hallucinations of dying miners. He attempted to drive it out with salt threats and brute intimidation, but the entity remained unyielding. That exchange solidified Foundation suspicion that SCP-8306's existence was directly entangled with the anomalous resonance of the mine itself. The entity's presence at Red Brook was thus not incidental, but embedded within the cycle of death, exploitation, and collapse that defined the operation. By the time Foundation forces seized the mine and began construction of Site-898 on its grounds, SCP-8306 had already woven itself into local folklore and worker psychology. Reports from those first months describe the entity stalking the half-built facility at night, carrying its lantern through the dark pine woods, whistling its rasping tune. Construction crews learned to respect it in silence, closing blinds against the glow of its firelight. The transformation of Red Brook from private exploitation to Foundation outpost marked the formal discovery stage of SCP-8306, yet in truth the anomaly had already been haunting those hills for years, silently recording the toll of coal, dust, and human ambition. The Foundation's first directed investigation into SCP-8306 began in late 1966, once Site-898 was designated as the regional hub for Run's Red anomalies. At that stage, information on the entity was fragmentary, half superstition, half rumor carried over from miners and construction workers. A containment team under Director Julian Eden initiated night patrols, attempting to establish direct contact or capture. The results of these early engagements were marked by confusion, disorganization, and a gradual realization that the anomaly's properties rendered standard protocols useless. The initial plan involved a simple perimeter lockdown around the abandoned Red Brook tunnels. Motion sensors, electrified fencing, and even chemical deterrents were installed to restrict access. Within days, the measures were proven ineffective. SCP-8306 manifested freely inside the camp boundaries, appearing in full view of guards who swore the perimeter remained undisturbed. Reports describe its lantern light materializing on the far side of barriers without transition, accompanied by its rattling cough. When personnel advanced on the figure, it simply demanifested, only to reappear moments later elsewhere on the grounds. By the second week, attempts to treat it as a corporeal intruder had been abandoned. Recorded testimonies from those first close encounters are telling. Security Officer Griggs described hearing footsteps outside his cabin at 2:00 a.m., followed by the sound of something scraping along the wooden siding. Upon opening his door, he reported seeing SCP-8306 tip its hat before fading into mist. Griggs' written statement includes the line, "I felt like it wanted me to know it could come and go, and I couldn't stop it." Another officer, newly transferred from Site-17, experienced acute respiratory distress after entering a shaft where the entity had recently been sighted. Medical staff documented black particulate clogging his lungs despite no coal dust being present. His condition stabilized after 3 days, but his case established the first verified physiological hazard associated with the anomaly. It was during this phase that Dr. Helen Gibbs attempted a direct observational study. She arranged for concealed cameras at the tributary near Coalbed Swamp, baiting the location with objects thought to attract SCP-8306, lamp oil, tuning forks, and a miner's helmet. Film recovered from that experiment depicts the anomaly approaching, kneeling beside the offerings, and selecting only the lamp oil. Before leaving, it looked directly at the camera lens. Playback showed no eyes, only hollow cavities. The camera ceased functioning within seconds, its circuitry corroded with an unidentified black residue. This failure convinced Site-898 Command that SCP-8306 was aware of observation and capable of disrupting equipment at will. These encounters shifted the investigation from physical capture to behavioral study. Cryptozoology staff began logging each appearance, charting patterns in its movements across the site. They concluded SCP-8306 exhibited territorial behavior, its presence strongest around the original mining shafts and hydroelectric installations. Yet there was also a social component. The entity frequently lingered near cabins at night, acknowledging new arrivals by pausing at their windows. Some staff interpreted this as benevolence, others as predation. Internal divisions soon emerged between those who wanted to continue direct study and those demanding full quarantine of the grounds. One of the defining moments of this stage occurred in June 1970. Dr. Seth Miranda, roused by strange singing outside his cabin, recorded a fragment of SCP-8306's performance. The tape captures the distorted strains of a folk ballad interlaced with coughing. Analysis of the audio revealed background anomalies, faint secondary voices, as if a chorus of unseen figures accompanied the foreman's song. Some suggested they were echoes of deceased miners. Others feared they were auditory hallucinations seeded by prolonged exposure. The recording was archived but never publicly distributed within the site. Personnel already unnerved by superstition required no further provocation. By the end of the first year of surveillance, the Foundation acknowledged that SCP-8306 resisted all standard containment and that prolonged observation posed escalating psychological risk. The early investigation thus established two principles. The anomaly could not be forced into controlled space, and interaction with it inevitably blurred the line between folklore and measurable reality. From that point forward, Site-898 would operate less as a prison for SCP-8306 and more as a precarious coexistence zone, where superstition hardened into policy and science ceded ground to ritual. SCP-8306's detailed description emerged slowly from the fragments collected during years of observation, interviews, and incidental encounters. What initially appeared to be a spectral miner wandering the grounds proved far more complex. The entity presents as a man of roughly 60 years, garbed in attire consistent with mid-20th century Appalachian miners, overalls, heavy boots, and a helmet often accompanied by a lantern. Its form is superficially solid, leaving impressions in mud and pine needles when it walks, yet it exhibits no biological consistency. Autonomic functions are absent, no pulse, no breath except for the rasping coughs that echo through its chest cavity. When injured, its body exudes thick coal-stained mud instead of blood, a substance later analyzed as containing trace anthracite particulates and organic matter inconsistent with any single species. The most striking features remain its face. Both eyes are cavernous sockets, black voids without visible depth, and its mouth gapes unnaturally wide, a static hollow lined with no discernible anatomy. Despite this, SCP-8306 communicates fluently in Appalachian English, punctuating speech with wheezing laughter and bouts of choking coughs. Witnesses describe the act of looking directly into its sockets as physically oppressive, producing nausea, vertigo, and in some cases auditory hallucinations. Victims report hearing collapsing timbers, dying men's screams, or the clanging of picks deep in stone. Prolonged contact has induced psychosomatic respiratory illness akin to miner's lung, even in personnel with no history of exposure to coal dust. The anomaly demonstrates sapience and a peculiar etiquette. It identifies itself only as the foreman, rejecting attempts to attach personal names. While initially hostile toward individuals connected to Marshall, Carter, and Dark, SCP-8306 has displayed measured politeness when approached respectfully by Foundation staff. It has been observed tipping its cap to shadow figures, only it seems to perceive, pausing at porches to acknowledge unseen presences, and refusing more than one offering when presented with multiple gifts. These patterns suggest a self-imposed code, part ritual and part superstition, which appears to dictate its behavior. Its anomalous properties are not limited to perception. SCP-8306 can manifest and demanifest without transition, ignoring barriers, locks, and distance. The effect has been documented within reinforced concrete facilities as well as across open woodland, suggesting no spatial restriction. This capacity makes physical containment impossible. Additionally, its lantern produces a firelight of fluctuating intensity, sometimes illuminating shadowy figures or environments not present in consensus reality. Observers have documented silhouettes of miners seated on porches, strangers standing silently in the woods, or doorways opening to nowhere when the lantern passes by. Whether these are projections, hallucinations, or residual human spirits remains undetermined. The entity's interaction with human physiology carries further hazards. When SCP-8306 exerts force, its touch leaves residues of black sludge capable of clogging airways. The most extreme case occurred during its confrontation with POI 8987, when the mud poured continuously from its face and suffocated the man despite attempts to resist. Less violent exposures include contamination of turbines and machinery, where the substance corrodes metal and interrupts function. Tests on recovered samples reveal they break down rapidly once separated from the entity, evaporating into acrid fumes. This ephemeral nature prevents comprehensive analysis. Despite these dangers, many staff note that SCP-8306 exhibits restraint. It has never killed a Foundation employee unprovoked, and in multiple cases it has warned of unstable tunnels or equipment before accidents occurred. Yet this apparent benevolence is undercut by its unpredictability. The same entity that accepts gifts and converses with researchers may vanish without warning or confront intruders with suffocating violence. It embodies contradictions: protector and saboteur, guide and executioner. Descriptions from interviews and recordings converge on one consistent impression: SCP-8306 is not merely a ghost of a miner, but a manifestation of the mine's history itself, its body stitched from coal dust, black lung, and industrial tragedy. Whether it is an echo of countless dead, a construct born from the resonance of SCP-8987, or something more deliberate remains unresolved. The Foundation's difficulty lies not only in defining its abilities, but in recognizing that its existence defies separation from the land it haunts. SCP-8306 is the Red Brook Mine given voice, a faceless foreman presiding over an eternal shift in darkness. The psychological and physical effects of SCP-8306 on human subjects have become one of the most disturbing facets of its study. Reports accumulated at Site-898 demonstrate a consistent pattern. Prolonged exposure to the entity induces symptoms that mimic both occupational illness and profound psychological trauma. These effects are not immediate, but escalate with repeated encounters, making even veteran staff vulnerable over time. The most common phenomenon involves auditory intrusion. Personnel who have stood within a few meters of SCP-8306 describe hearing more than its rattling breath, echoes of collapsing tunnels, cries of injured miners, and faint voices calling out from unseen depths. Several witnesses claim these phantom sounds continued long after SCP-8306 had vanished, persisting in their dreams or re-emerging when alone at night. Psychological evaluations catalog recurring nightmares. Subjects report waking in their cabins convinced they are buried alive, suffocating under tons of coal dust. These dreams often coincide with bouts of shortness of breath or spontaneous coughing fits. Physical manifestations are equally alarming. Routine health screenings of Site-898 personnel revealed elevated rates of respiratory distress despite negligible exposure to coal or ash. In one documented case, a researcher newly transferred to the site developed acute symptoms of pneumoconiosis within a month, coughing up blackened phlegm though no particulate matter was detected in his lungs. Autopsy of deceased staff who had prolonged interaction with SCP-8306 showed deposits of an unidentified coal mud composite embedded in bronchial tissue. The pathology bore resemblance to long-term miner's lung but progressed with unnatural speed. Victim testimonies further illustrate the emotional toll. One junior guard, who briefly made eye contact with SCP-8306 during a midnight patrol, submitted a written report stating he felt weighed down by the gaze, describing it as if his chest had filled with gravel. Within 24 hours, he suffered a panic attack severe enough to require sedation. Another staff member broke protocol and whistled back at the entity. The result was near immediate collapse, with the subject convulsing and choking on a slurry of black fluid before being revived. Medical staff later determined no liquid remained in his lungs, as if the event had been psychosomatic, yet viscerally real. Psychological assessments conducted by Foundation psychiatrists note a growing split among personnel stationed at Site-898. Some develop a strange reverence for SCP-8306, describing it as a guardian spirit or patron of miners, adopting local rituals as genuine acts of faith. Others become increasingly paranoid, refusing to leave cabins at night, convinced that even the sound of coughing in the forest is a summons to death. This dichotomy has strained unit cohesion, with superstition becoming indistinguishable from protocol. Dr. Atticus Rune's encounter in 1975 illustrates how SCP-8306's presence destabilizes human perception. During an accidental meeting at the Brook, Rune described feeling humbled and inexplicably confessional, as if compelled to share personal secrets. The recording of the exchange shows the anomaly encouraging disclosure, remarking, "Sounds like you've got a story, son, 'cause I do too." Rune later admitted under hypnosis that he felt an overwhelming compulsion to unburden himself, paired with an irrational trust in the entity. This effect has since been classified as mimetic influence, suggesting SCP-8306 can manipulate psychological states toward vulnerability. Compounding these issues is the long-term residency effect. Staff who remain posted at Site-898 for more than 2 years exhibit measurable decline in respiratory capacity and increased susceptibility to depression, dissociation, and auditory hallucinations. Some insist they hear knocking beneath the soil when alone. Others claim to see shadowed figures seated on porches whenever SCP-8306 is near. The prevailing theory is that the anomaly saturates its environment with residual influence, gradually reshaping human senses until reality conforms to its presence. Taken together, the evidence paints a grim picture. SCP-8306 not only kills through direct suffocation and mud extrusion, but corrodes the human psyche through prolonged exposure. It does not merely haunt, it replicates the very conditions of the minds, burying lungs with dust and minds with dread. The Foundation has since debated whether Site-898 itself is compromised, as if the act of living alongside SCP-8306 slowly transforms its personnel into extensions of the folklore it embodies. Experiments conducted to measure or contain SCP-8306 have produced a catalog of failures, anomalies, and unintended consequences that highlight the futility of conventional approaches. The earliest attempts, undertaken in the late 1960s as Site-898 reached operational capacity, revolved around standard observation and capture protocols. Field teams deployed containment nets, tranquilizers, and reinforced holding cells modeled on Spectre-class entities. None succeeded. SCP-8306 passed through barriers without resistance, shrugged off tranquilizing agents, and vanished from locked chambers as if they had never existed. In 1968, Director Eden authorized controlled exposure trials to test physiological effects. Volunteers, primarily D-Class personnel, were instructed to remain in proximity while SCP-8306 manifested. Within minutes, subjects began coughing violently, spitting black phlegm identical to samples recovered from incident sites. In one case, a subject collapsed after describing a sensation of gravel pouring into the chest cavity. Autopsy later revealed no anatomical cause. The lungs were clear, yet the trachea was stained with coal residue that dissipated within hours of death. Repeated trials yielded the same results, establishing the anomaly's ability to induce lethal symptoms independent of material vectors. Foundation scientists attempted to harness these effects through environmental isolation. SCP-8306 was lured into sealed observation chambers constructed near the Red Brook tributary, the doors reinforced, and atmospheres scrubbed for particulate. Within seconds of manifesting, the entity disrupted all recording devices, producing footage corrupted by static and frames of indistinct shadow figures. After 7 minutes, the chamber doors opened unaided, despite remaining mechanically locked, and SCP-8306 was observed outside the facility, lantern alight. Post-incident analysis showed the steel hinges inside the chamber had rusted through entirely, though they had been new only days earlier. Further experimentation revolved around offerings. Researchers presented multiple objects simultaneously, tools, metals, foodstuffs, to observe selection patterns. SCP-8306 invariably chose one, most often lamp oil, tuning forks, shale, or saltwater toffee, while ignoring the rest. One experiment attempted to trick the entity by presenting contaminated lamp oil laced with tracer compounds. SCP-8306 accepted the container, lifted it to eye level, and then deliberately poured it out across the ground. Subsequent review of the soil sample revealed the tracers had vanished entirely, replaced with oily black sludge inconsistent with the prepared substance. The implication was clear. SCP-8306 either recognized the deception or altered the material on contact. Attempts at disruption proved more dangerous. In 1971, Dr. Hillard initiated an unsanctioned trial involving acoustic countermeasures, broadcasting amplified whistling tones into the woods to elicit a reaction. The result was catastrophic. All recording equipment at the test site failed simultaneously, and 3 staff collapsed with acute pulmonary distress. Witnesses reported seeing multiple shadow figures standing beside SCP-8306 as it emerged, whistling back in unison. Hillard resigned following disciplinary action, citing recurring hallucinations of muffled singing outside his quarters. Containment specialists also attempted to test SCP-8306's boundaries by salting pathways, referencing Keshner's own claims of attempting to smoke it out. Trials with salt barriers yielded no measurable effect. The entity crossed without hesitation, though it did pause briefly as if to acknowledge the attempt. More troubling was the aftermath. 2 researchers involved in placing the salt reported developing rashes across their forearms resembling coal burns, which persisted for weeks despite treatment. One of the final experiments, conducted in 1975, attempted to provoke a hostile demonstration under controlled conditions. A D-class subject was instructed to insult SCP-8306 and deny it passage during a scheduled patrol. Audio logs record the entity pausing, wheezing, and then leaning close to whisper, "Your breath ain't yours to waste." The subject immediately collapsed, expelling mud from the mouth and nose. Though resuscitation was attempted, the individual expired within 4 minutes. No trace of the mud remained after disposal. This incident prompted the suspension of all deliberate provocations. The accumulated data established several grim constants. SCP-8306 could not be restrained, deceived, or repelled by conventional methods. Its responses to testing oscillated between indifference, mild amusement, and violent reprisal, with little consistency. The Foundation concluded that continued experimentation risked not only personnel, but also site infrastructure, as repeated tests correlated with unexplained power failures, corrupted recordings, and mechanical breakdowns. By the mid-1970s, research directives shifted from control to coexistence, prioritizing mitigation of psychological fallout and appeasement rituals over aggressive study. What had begun as a scientific investigation now resembled the wary maintenance of an ancient pact, where every failed experiment reinforced the notion that SCP-8306 dictated the terms of engagement, not the Foundation. Recovered documents and addenda relating to SCP-8306 form a fragmented but chilling narrative, a patchwork of official reports, intercepted correspondence, and personal testimony that never aligns into a complete picture. Together they illustrate how the anomaly weaves itself into both the landscape and the psyche of those who encounter it. One of the earliest pieces is the unsent letter from Foreman Theodore Keshner, seized during investigation Red Canary. The document, found among his forged certifications and unsigned accident reports, outlines his mounting frustration with what he called a devil in my mind. The language is telling. Keshner admits to direct confrontations, acknowledging that the entity mocked him, stalked his men, and interfered with detonations. Yet he also notes that his workers began regarding it as sacred, a patron saint of accidents beneath. His letter crescendos into an unnerving description of staring into SCP-8306's eyeless sockets, hearing phantom screams of falling platforms, and feeling compelled to strike the ground between them. The letter breaks off with the entity's whispered command, "Don't keep them waiting." The message was never mailed, but the Foundation has preserved it as a rare glimpse into the relationship between SCP-8306 and its enemies. Security Report 8306, dated June 1970, captures another layer of the file. Dr. Seth Miranda's account describes waking to SCP-8306's lantern passing between cabins. He watched as silhouettes appeared on porches, silent figures in rocking chairs and doorways, vanishing when the light receded. The recording he made of its singing, distorted lines from the folk song In the Pines, suggests the anomaly draws upon cultural memory, reanimating fragments of human tradition through a voice riddled with coughs. Analysts detected low-frequency anomalies in the tape, nearly subsonic moans layered beneath the melody, which some claimed were additional voices. The recording remains archived, classified under contaminated media. The Foundation also preserved camcorder footage from Dr. Atticus Rune's encounter in 1975. Though much of the recording is obscured, what remains reveals SCP-8306 seated by the brook, lantern at its side. The conversation is mundane at first, Rune apologizing for interrupting, the entity chuckling weakly, but grows pointed as the foreman critiques Marshall, Carter, and Dark's exploitation of the mine. Its words are damning. Them men didn't care none about the hell they wrought on this holler, cared for nothing but their holy order of anthracite. When Rune presses about the Foundation's presence, SCP-8306 dismisses him with a wheeze. Long as you don't walk the paths of your brothers before you, I won't. The tape ends with SCP-8306 hinting it too has a story to tell, a statement that continues to fuel speculation among staff. Supplementary cultural addenda reveal how Site-898 staff internalized these encounters. Polling over the years showed half the personnel feared the entity and half regarded it with cautious intrigue. The tradition of leaving gifts on cabin windowsills developed from this ambivalence. Trinkets, shiny stones, and sweets left as offerings to demonstrate goodwill. SCP-8306's selective acceptance, taking only one object, often lamp oil or toffees, was seen by many as a sign of preference, even approval. The practice was never formalized but persisted across decades, blending superstition with protocol. The most damning addendum remains the Red Canary incident footage from July 1966, where SCP-8306 was recorded assaulting Keshner near the brook. Personnel witnessed it suffocate him with coal-stained mud until he fell silent, then drag him into the water. The aftermath was as disturbing as the act itself. 2 days later, turbines at the hydroelectric plant failed, clogged with human remains. This connection between SCP-8306's violence and infrastructural sabotage has never been resolved. Foundation analysts debated whether the anomaly intentionally redirected remains or whether its presence simply warped the environment to reflect the brutality of mining itself. Collectively, these recovered documents and recordings resist easy classification. They suggest SCP-8306 is both spectral overseer and environmental consequence, a force entangled with the mine's legacy of death. Every testimony, every audio artifact, every sighting underscores the same pattern. Encounters with the foreman blur the line between witness and participant, transforming ordinary staff into unwilling scribes of its history. The addenda, scattered and incomplete, form less a scientific record than a haunted archive, anomalous evidence that the Foundation is cataloging not only an entity, but the persistence of tragedy itself. Internal disputes surrounding SCP-8306 began almost as soon as Site-898 was established, fueled by the anomaly's uncontainable nature and the growing divide between scientific procedure and folklore practices. Within Foundation ranks, staff split into camps, those who insisted on approaching SCP-8306 as an object of rigorous study, and those who argued for a cautious, even reverential coexistence. Over time, these disagreements hardened into outright censorship, hidden motives, and cover-ups that continue to haunt the site's internal record. The first major conflict erupted in 1969, when Director Julian Eden circulated a memorandum discouraging aggressive containment attempts. His justification, that SCP-8306's ability to pass through barriers rendered further trials unnecessary, was met with outrage by a faction of containment specialists who argued that abandoning experimentation contradicted the Foundation's purpose. Among them was Dr. Hillard, whose later unsanctioned whistling experiment nearly crippled equipment across the site. Internal communications from this period show Hillard accusing Eden of turning Site-898 into a monastery, while Eden privately described Hillard's persistence as a death wish dressed up as science. The debate deepened with the emergence of staff superstitions. Younger researchers began adopting local traditions, padding mine supports, leaving gifts on windowsills, avoiding whistling at night, not merely as cultural gestures, but as survival practices. Critics within the Foundation called these behaviors unprofessional and dangerous, a descent into ritual over reason. Yet the superstitions proved effective at reducing incidents, and eventually even skeptical personnel complied, not out of belief, but as risk mitigation. Memos reveal this evolution. By the mid-1970s, staff training at Site 898 included a casual briefing on customs, a thinly veiled acknowledgement of rituals the Foundation would never officially endorse. Censorship soon followed. Reports of SCP-8306 inducing hallucinations or physiological symptoms in staff were quietly redacted from wider Foundation circulation, filed only under restricted site archives. Medical records documenting black mud residues in deceased personnel were sealed under Level 4 clearance. A 1972 directive from O5 Command emphasized the need to minimize propagation of folkloric contamination across Foundation infrastructure, effectively restricting SCP-8306 documentation to Site 898 itself. This insularity created a feedback loop. As outside oversight dwindled, internal culture grew increasingly shaped by the entity's presence, a fact that unsettled even senior staff. Perhaps the most troubling dispute revolved around Director Eden himself. Eyewitnesses to the Red Canary incident recorded Eden freezing when SCP-8306 locked eyes with him, only breaking trance once the lantern's fire flared. Some staff interpreted this as evidence of mimetic influence, raising concerns that the director had been compromised. Others whispered that Eden had willingly chosen non-interference, convinced SCP-8306's violence was necessary or even just. Private logs recovered after Eden's death reveal cryptic notes. "We can only hold the mine if we let the foreman keep his shift. To interfere is to inherit the collapse." Whether these words reflect indoctrination, resignation, or something more deliberate remains unresolved. Security Chief Zoe Miranda repeatedly clashed with Eden over the site's handling of the anomaly. Reports show her advocating for armed readiness during encounters, warning that passivity placed personnel at risk. Yet her demands were often overruled, her concerns buried under layers of classification. In one intercepted communication, Miranda confided to a colleague, "We've built a site on superstition, and we call it containment. The foreman isn't in a cell. We are." This statement was flagged but never officially acknowledged, suggesting even senior leadership feared drawing attention to internal fractures. By the mid-1970s, Site 898 had effectively become a place where folklore and Foundation bureaucracy fused into something neither wholly scientific nor wholly ritualistic. Dissenters who pressed for transparency or harsher measures were reassigned or silenced. Field notes went missing, recordings were misfiled, and staff who pressed too far into questioning the anomaly often left the site citing stress or illness. The cover-up was not only of SCP-8306's true nature, but of the Foundation's failure to exert control, a failure buried beneath layers of silence. The result was a paradox. Site 898 was outwardly a functioning Foundation facility, but internally it operated more like a haunted company town, its rules dictated less by handbooks and more by an entity no one could command. SCP-8306 had achieved what few anomalies could. It fractured the Foundation from within, forcing secrecy, ritual, and compromise into the very heart of its operation. The disputes remain etched in classified transcripts and hushed testimonies, proof that sometimes the greatest danger is not what an anomaly does to the world outside, but what it makes the Foundation become in response. The escalation that defined SCP-8306's file occurred during the infamous Red Brook confrontation of July 1966, the incident that transformed the foreman from a persistent anomaly into an undeniable existential threat. Though many reports from the period remain redacted, what has survived paints a vivid and harrowing picture of violence, paralysis, and a silence that still lingers in Site 898's corridors. The event began with the escape of Foreman Theodore Keschner, POI 8987, from temporary custody during his transfer to Site 898. Keshner, already compromised by years of exposure to SCP-8306, fled into Coalbed Swamp under cover of dusk. CCTV footage retrieved from Red Brook shows him stumbling through foliage, coughing and cursing as he attempted to evade pursuit. Then came the glow, the flickering gold of an oil lantern illuminating the wheezing specter that emerged from the brush. The recording is distorted, but the audio is clear enough to capture Keshner's curses and SCP-8306's low, rattling responses. The exchange is damning. Keshner accuses SCP-8306 of haunting his mind, sabotaging operations, and leading Foundation forces to the site. SCP-8306 counters, wheezing that Keshner himself had opened them gates, and that the mine was never his to keep. Their confrontation escalates from verbal sparring to physical violence. Keshner, armed with a stone, strikes SCP-8306 across the head, splitting its face open. Witnesses described coal-thick mud pouring from the wound instead of blood. Yet instead of weakening, the entity pressed harder, suffocating Keshner with its hands and expelling mud from its own face into his mouth and lungs. Foundation security arrived during the struggle, led by Chief Zoe Miranda, with Director Eden and Dr. Helen Gibbs trailing behind. The accounts align on one chilling fact. Though armed personnel had a clear shot, Eden commanded them not to fire. Those present recall his words, hold your fire," and his gaze locked in paralysis when SCP-8306's eyeless face turned toward him. Some later claimed Eden appeared entranced, trembling, as if gripped by something beyond simple fear. The anomaly dropped its lantern in the dirt, where it shattered and spilled oil into flame. The blaze illuminated the swamp as SCP-8306 forced mud down Keshner's throat until his struggling ceased. The aftermath was chaos. Personnel, unsure whether to intervene, withdrew behind the burning oil line. Dr. Gibbs pleaded with Eden to order engagement. Chief Miranda demanded clarity. Eden, pale and gasping, whispered only, "Do not engage." His refusal has since become one of the most contested decisions in Site-898's history. Witness reports emphasize the sensory overload of those minutes, the crackling fire, Keshner's gargling cries, the wet choking of SCP-8306 as it wheezed over him. Several staff reported phantom noises overlaying the scene, the clatter of mine carts, distant shouts, timbers breaking in collapse. Whether these were auditory hallucinations or anomalous bleed-through remains unknown. By the time the fire sputtered out, Keshner lay motionless, his face blackened by coal mud and his body dragged into the brook by SCP-8306. Security personnel, weapons raised, did nothing. 2 days later, when Site-898 experienced unexplained power failures, engineers found the hydroelectric turbines clogged with human remains. Tissue analysis matched Keshner. This confirmed what many already feared. SCP-8306 not only killed, but ensured the remains were subsumed into the infrastructure of the site itself. The implication was clear. The foreman could dictate the conditions of survival, turning the very systems the Foundation relied upon into vessels of its will. The Red Brook confrontation cemented SCP-8306's reputation among personnel. No longer was it a ghost tolerated on the periphery of camp life. It was an arbiter deciding who lived and who was consumed by mud and current. Within days, new superstitions spread. A ban on crossing the brook at night, a compulsion to leave offerings at the hydro plant, whispered prayers when coughing echoed through the woods. The Foundation's silence in official records, reducing the incident to a vague containment complication, only deepened the paranoia. The escalation was complete. SCP-8306 was no longer viewed as a study subject, but as a force entwined with the land, a presence that had claimed both a man and the machinery of the site in one gesture. Its lantern's glow became a warning, its cough became a prophecy, and its silence after the incident became the loudest testimony. The mine had taken back its foreman, and the Foundation would never truly dictate the terms of his shift. Resolution of SCP-8306's case file did not arrive in the form of capture or neutralization, but through reluctant reclassification and the establishment of a containment philosophy that acknowledged failure. Following the Red Brook incident and the confirmed death of POI 8987, Site-898 leadership convened a closed tribunal to determine how the entity should be treated. Minutes from that tribunal remain heavily redacted, yet fragments reveal the atmosphere of resignation. Direct confrontation yields only escalation. The site exists not to imprison the foreman, but to survive him. The final consensus reclassified SCP-8306 as Euclid, a designation that reflected not its level of hostility, but the impossibility of restraining it. Standard containment procedures were abandoned in favor of adaptive cultural management. Blinds closed at dusk, whistling forbidden, gifts left on windowsills. What began as superstition was codified into unofficial protocol, a ritualized détente between anomaly and staff. This decision marked a quiet but profound shift in the Foundation's identity at Site-898. Instead of enforcing dominance over the anomaly, the organization bent to its presence, integrating survival customs into the daily fabric of life. Subsequent decades confirmed the uneasy stability. SCP-8306 continued to manifest unpredictably, walking the grounds with its lantern, leaving wheezing coughs as warnings of its passage. Occasionally it accepted trinkets. Occasionally it paused to address staff with polite small talk. Occasionally it sang. Yet the memory of Red Brook ensured that even the most benign appearances carried a weight of dread. Personnel turnover remained high. Those stationed too long developed psychosomatic lung conditions or descended into ritualistic obsession. Nevertheless, the site endured. No further fatalities were attributed directly to the entity, a fact often cited by defenders of the appeasement model. The long-term implications of this resolution are more ambiguous. Internally, debates never ceased. Some argue that tolerating SCP-8306 has allowed the Foundation to maintain critical presence in a region saturated with Run's red anomalies. Others condemn the arrangement as capitulation, evidence that the foreman has infiltrated the Foundation's structure as effectively as it haunted the mine. Whispered accusations persist that Director Eden's paralysis during the Red Brook event was not momentary fear but a binding pact, an agreement struck in silence that the Foundation dare not acknowledge. His cryptic notes: "We can only hold the mine if we let the foreman keep his shift," continue to fuel speculation. The entity itself appears aware of its place in this balance. Interviews, accidental or deliberate, reveal it views Site-898 staff not as enemies, but as the next crew assigned to the mountain's depths. "Another day, another dollar in that lot," it once remarked to Dr. Rune. "Long as you don't walk the paths of your brothers before you, I won't." Such statements suggest SCP-8306 interprets history not as a sequence of events, but as a perpetual shift, each generation of miners, operatives, or researchers merely inheriting the same condemned role. Resolution, therefore, is less an ending than a verdict of coexistence. SCP-8306 remains unbound, its lantern still glimpsed on foggy nights, its cough echoing across cabins. The site persists in a liminal state, both facility and folklore-bound settlement, its staff trapped between the rational authority of the Foundation and the irrational customs demanded by the anomaly. Official files end with a sterile declaration of containment stability, but oral tradition among personnel tells a different story, that the foreman still walks the grounds, that the sound of rattling breath outside your window is not a threat, but a reminder that in Appalachia's dark hollers, death is not a visitor, it is the shift that never ends. Thus, SCP-8306's resolution is not closure, but a standing compromise. The Foundation keeps its station, the foreman keeps his watch, and as long as the lights of Site-898 burn, the two remain bound in silence, each acknowledging the other in a contract written not on paper, but in coal dust, shadows, and the endless cough of the mine.